this is Dr. Wilt. So.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the first film in the spotlight on Mexican cinema for RiverRun. We're showing 6 films this year, and actually there's a more even recent Mexican film being shown as part of the competition called Norteado. So we're getting 7 feature films this year from Cine Nacional in Mexico. As Chris said, my name is Dave Wilt, and I'm here to help. Well, maybe not to help, but to talk a little bit about Mexican cinema and Maria Candelaria. Actually, discussing any film for me is a little bit like examining a spider web. I mean, there's so many little threads, and each one has something interesting that you can talk about. But of course, we can't talk about every little thing. So today I've selected just a couple of threads to deal with Maria Candelaria to talk about before the movie, and then afterwards, if anybody wants to talk about the movie, we will have the opportunity to discuss it as well. The 3 things that I figured I would talk about before we actually begin the movie, and I will be brief. What about the film Maria Candelaria in the context of Mexican cinema altogether, a 1943 film? What about the filmmakers, the people who made this film, the people who appear in the film? And what about the film's theme and content, and specifically what about the way the film portrays the indigenous people of Mexico? These are, like the threads of a spider web, all sort of connected. They all have a little bit of relationship to each other as well as many other things, but as I said, we've chosen those 3 to talk about today. Maria Candelaria was produced in 1943. Although movies had been made in Mexico since the 1890s, and the first feature fictional film was actually made in 1916, the Mexican film industry, to call it an industry, really didn't exist until the sound era, about 1930. And it took a few years for the industry to actually establish itself to begin making a significant number of movies every year. And while Mexican movies were popular among Spanish-speaking audiences, particularly in Latin America, but also in the United States during the 1930s and into the 1940s, they weren't really very well known otherwise. They didn't have the sort of art film reputation that, say, movies made in France or movies made in the Soviet Union had in that particular period of the 1930s. The golden age, as they call it now, of Mexican cinema actually began in the early 1940s. And there were a number of reasons. The industry had been around for a while. Also, World War II had started, and the United States was an ally of Mexico during the Second World War. And they had the idea that if they helped the Mexican film industry, they'd be helping a pro-democracy film industry that could become popular in Latin America. And the other 2 major Spanish film-producing countries were Spain and Argentina, and neither one of those was particularly our friend during World War II, so Mexico got the benefit of that. Also, there were technical and artistic advancements had been made, and the Spanish Civil War, a number of people left Spain at the end of the Spanish Civil War in 1939 because they didn't agree with Franco, or Franco didn't agree with them, and Mexico got the benefit of a number of people who had worked in the Spanish film industry. So Mexico actually did pretty well in terms of the film industry when World War II came around. Maria Candelaria was one of the earliest Mexican films to receive international attention outside of the Spanish-speaking world. It was actually released in the United States in cinemas, in sort of art house cinemas, under the title Portrait of Maria, and it won the grand prize at the Cannes Film Festival after the war in 1946. A number of years ago, there was a poll in Mexico from filmmakers and film critics, and they were asked to choose the top 100 Mexican films of all time up to that point. And Maria Candelaria was selected number 37 on that list. So it still has a very strong critical reputation in Mexico. The second thing that we'll talk about are the people who created Maria Candelaria. Film is a collaborative art. You can say, here's a director, here's a writer, here's a star, but they all have to work together to make a film. A single person can't make a film, except, of course, for the films that I make on YouTube. I make those all by myself. But other than that, if you're going to make a real movie, you have to have a crew of people to make the movie. The director of Maria Candelaria was Emilio Fernandez. He was born in 1903. He left Mexico in the 1920s for political reasons and came to Hollywood and worked as a bit actor, a dancer, and some other things in various Hollywood movies of the late 1920s and 1930s. Then he went back to Mexico in the mid-30s, worked in some movies as an actor, wrote a while, and then began directing movies himself in 1941. Maria Candelaria was his fourth film. Emilio Fernandez was very Mexico-centric in the movies that he made. The vast majority of the movies he made from 1941 up to his last in 1978 were set in Mexico, and they dealt with Mexican themes. It's very notable because in the early 1940s, we talked about Mexican cinema suddenly became more powerful. That was the golden age. But they sort of turned away from folkloric themes, and they began to have a more cosmopolitan and international outlook in that particular period. But Emilio Fernandez went against that, and he said he was going to make movies that were about Mexico and about Mexicans. He was a major exception in that, and he did carry that theme throughout his career. In addition to Maria Candelaria, which we said won the Cannes Film Festival and was internationally acclaimed, he also got international attention with a film called The Pearl, or La Perla, 1946, which was based on a John Steinbeck story and was very popular internationally. And he also worked with John Ford on a film called The Fugitive, which was made in Mexico in 1947. And after the film, if we have a little time, we can talk about what happened to Emilio afterwards, but at least at this point in his career, he was the most well-known international Mexican filmmaker, and he would remain so until Luis Buñuel, who was actually Spanish but came to Mexico in the mid-1940s. Buñuel made Los Olvidados, which will also be shown here at RiverRun, and Buñuel suddenly became a very popular, well-known international Mexican filmmaker. But up to that point, it was Emilio Fernandez. It's not to say that there weren't other good filmmakers making movies in Mexico in the 1940s. There certainly were. But Emilio Fernandez became internationally popular and well-known because of his focus on Mexicanidad, films about Mexico, and his obvious talent. That sort of made him stand out. It's hard to discuss Emilio Fernandez and Maria Candelaria without discussing cinematographer Gabriel Figueroa. He's known as the artist with light, the painter with light. Figueroa was born in 1907. He worked with Emilio Fernandez 24 times over his career. Already in Maria Candelaria, which was like their second collaboration, you can see the sheer beauty of his images, the sort of plastic beauty, the pictorial aspect of this film. His trademark is figures shown against the sky. If you want to count how many times you'll see somebody's face in the sky against the background, or sort of low-angle shots of the horizon and the clouds. That was his trademark composition, and he used that in many, many films. He's one of those rare examples of a technician, a cinematographer, a photographer who was acknowledged as an artist, not just by the people who worked with him and not just by highbrow film critics, but by people who actually went and watched the movies. A lot of times you would go and you would look at a poster for a film, and it would say, Maria Candelaria, starring Dolores Del Rio, directed by Emilio Fernandez, and photography by Gabriel Figueroa. You don't often see on a movie poster the cinematographer's name listed that large, and that was because Gabriel Figueroa was considered probably the greatest cinematographer in Mexican film history, and also internationally very strong reputation.